She was nobody, rejected, exiled, left to die in the snow while the world moved on without her. But the night Lysera Vale pulled a stranger from the ice, she didn't just save a life. She shattered every wall fate had ever built around her. This is the story of a forgotten healer who walked into a kingdom of wolves and made the most dangerous alpha in the north kneel. If you've been written off, cast out, told you don't belong, this one is for you. Stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. We're just getting started. The blizzard came without warning. One breath, the sky was iron gray and still, the kind of stillness that sits on your chest like a boot heel. The next, the wind cracked open like something old and furious had finally lost patience, and the northern tundra turned white and screaming. Lysera Vale had lived through 18 winters. She knew what a killing storm looked like. She ran anyway, not toward shelter, toward the tree line, because her kindling was still out there, and if she lost that bundle, she'd lose the fire, and if she lost the fire, she'd be dead before dawn. Simple math, the kind of arithmetic that didn't care about pride or grief or the hollow ache that had taken up permanent residence behind her sternum since the day Ashvale's elders stood in a circle around her and told her to leave and not come back. The snow hit her face like gravel. She tucked her chin and pushed forward, boots punching through the crust with every step, thighs burning from 3 weeks of this same daily war against the same unforgiving ground. Her coat was layered rabbit fur and salvaged wool, stitched together herself with waxed sinew. It kept her alive. It did not keep her warm. There was a difference, and she'd learned it the hard way. She found the kindling bundle wedged against the base of a frost-black pine and shouldered it without stopping. On the way back, she counted her steps. 52 to the tree line, 52 back. She counted because counting kept the dark out, and the dark in a blizzard was a specific kind of dark that had nothing to do with light. It was the kind that whispered, "You're alone. You've always been alone. Nobody's coming." She knew. She didn't need reminding. The cave was shallow but angled against the wind, and she'd spent 4 days improving it, dragging pine boughs for insulation, packing the entrance gap with snowbrick the way the old mountain trappers did before the northern trade routes collapsed. She'd learned that from a book. She'd learned most things from books, which was part of why Ashvale had called her strange. And strange in a healing woman was just one letter from dangerous. She got the fire going with hands that had stopped shaking only because she'd trained them to. The flame caught. She sat back on her heels and watched it breathe. Outside, the storm howled and hammered. Inside, Lysera Vale was exactly as alone as she'd been the day they threw her out, and she told herself it was fine, and mostly she believed it. She was halfway through her evening meal, dried venison and melted snow, the kind of dinner that kept you functional without ever making you feel like a person, when she heard it. Not the wind. She knew the wind. She'd memorized every register of it in 3 weeks of sleeping inside its mouth. This was something underneath the wind. She set down her tin cup. There it was again. Low, rhythmic, human. Lysera was on her feet before she'd made any conscious decision. That was the thing about being a healer. The reflex sat deeper than reason. Someone out there was breathing wrong, and her body responded to that fact before her brain had finished arguing about it. She pulled on her outer layer, grabbed her lantern, and stepped into the blizzard. The cold hit her like an open hand. She bent into it and moved, swinging the lantern in short arcs, scanning the ground. The sound was coming from the northeast. She followed it for 40 steps, then 60. Then she nearly walked into the snowdrift and had to catch herself on both hands, lantern swinging wild. Beneath 3 inches of fresh accumulation, half buried and curled on her side, was a woman, old, dressed in furs that had been expensive once before the storm shredded them. Silver hair matted with ice, one hand still clutching the strap of a saddlebag that had been emptied, probably by whatever had thrown her from her horse. Still breathing, barely. "Hey!" Lysera dropped to her knees and pressed 2 fingers to the woman's throat, pulse thin and fluttering, like a moth against glass. "Hey, open your eyes. I need you to open your eyes." The woman's eyelids moved. Gray eyes, pale and sharp, even half drowned in cold and pain, found Lysera's face. "There you are." Lysera got an arm under her shoulders. "Can you move your legs?" The voice came out cracked, barely sound at all. "My horse. Gone. You're what I've got. Can you move your legs? A pause. Then the woman's right leg shifted. Good enough, Lysara said, and started hauling. It took the better part of an hour to get her back to the cave. The woman passed out twice, and Lysara dragged her both times, talking steadily because she'd found that voices kept people tethered. She talked about the weather, about the fire she'd built, about the particular stubborn quality of wet kindling that refused to catch. She talked about nothing. She kept talking until they were inside and the entrance was repacked and the fire was rebuilt high, and she stripped the ruined outer furs away and pressed her own blankets over the woman and started checking for damage. Both feet were dangerous. She worked on them for 2 hours, alternating heat and pressure, watching the color come back slowly from white to red to something closer to living. Left wrist, fractured. She set it with sticks and wound strips of her spare undershirt around it, working by feel in the firelight. 3 cracked ribs on the right side, which she could do little about beyond binding. Lysara's hands moved on their own, competent and unhurried, while her mind catalogued everything and her chest stayed quiet. This was what she was good at. This was the only place she had ever been good, and Ashvale had taken it from her anyway. Around the 3rd hour, the woman woke up fully. "You're not dead," Lysara said, without looking up from the poultice she was preparing for the frostbite. "That's something." "My name is Seraphine." The voice was steadier now, still thin, but there was something underneath it, a quality that Lysara would have called authority if she hadn't been so busy. "Lysara, don't try to sit up." A pause. "You set my wrist," Seraphine said. "I set your wrist." "You bound my ribs." "I bound your ribs." "Where did you learn to do that?" Lysara looked up then. The woman was watching her with those pale gray eyes, and there was something in them that didn't match her ruined condition, something that was very much alive and very much paying attention. "Books," Lysara said. "Go to sleep." Seraphine almost smiled. It was the strangest thing, lying half dead in a stranger's cave with her wrist bound and her feet wrapped, and she almost smiled. "You're not afraid of me," she said. "Should I be?" "Most people are." Lysara considered that, applied the poultice, pressed it gently against the worst of the frostbite, and felt the woman flinch without making a sound, which told her something about the kind of person she'd dragged out of the snow. "You're not most things," Seraphine said. "Neither are you," Lysara replied. "Now sleep." The storm raged all night. By the time it broke, Seraphine's color had returned and her breathing had steadied, and Lysara had not slept at all, because she was a healer, and healers didn't sleep when their patients were on the knife's edge. She sat with her knees pulled up and her back against the cave wall and fed the fire in small, careful increments, and did not think about Ashvale, or the circle of elders, or the look on her mother's face that had not been grief, but relief. She thought about the woman's hands instead, the calluses in the wrong places for a merchant, the way she'd gone absolutely still when she was in pain, not writhing, not crying, just still, like pain was something she'd made arrangements with a long time ago. She thought about the saddlebag, empty, but not thrown. Deliberately emptied, the strap cut clean. Someone had taken everything in it. By the time dawn light crept gray and pale through the entrance gap, Lysara had a picture in her head that she wasn't sure she liked. She was outside gathering snow for fresh water when she heard them. Horses. Multiple. Moving fast and coordinated across the frozen ground, not wandering, not lost. Moving with purpose. She straightened and turned and counted 5 riders cresting the shallow ridge to the north, and then behind them a 6th, and the 6th was riding slightly ahead of the rest in the way that people rode when the rest of the world arranged itself around them without being asked. They were wearing black. All of them. Black furs, black armor beneath it, wolves worked in silver at the shoulder. Their horses were war-bred and massive, and they moved across the tundra like the tundra owed them something. The man in the lead had his hood back despite the cold. Lysara looked at him for 3 seconds and understood, on some level beneath thought, that she was looking at a specific category of dangerous. Not reckless dangerous, not cruel for pleasure dangerous. The organized kind, the kind that had been forged rather than born. He saw her. He stopped his horse. His riders fanned out behind him, like a held breath. Lysara stood in the snow with a tin pot in her hand and did not move. The man swung down from his horse without hurrying. He was tall, the kind of tall that took up space in your awareness, that made you recalculate the dimensions of everything around it. His face was hard-planed and weather-worn, a scar running from his left jaw to the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were the particular pale color of winter sky right before the temperature drops another 10 degrees. He walked toward her. His warriors stayed back. He stopped 6 feet away and looked at her the way she'd looked at Seraphine the night before, cataloging, assessing, deciding. "There is a woman," he said. His voice was flat and cold and carried the way voices carried in open country, with no effort at all. "Old, silver hair. She came through this area last night." "There's a woman in my cave," Lysera said. "She has 2 cracked feet, a fractured wrist, and 3 broken ribs. She'll survive." Something moved behind his eyes, fast, and then gone. "Take me to her," he said. "Who's asking?" One of the riders behind him shifted. Another made a sound low in his chest, almost not a sound at all, more of a vibration. The tall man didn't turn around. He just looked at her with those pale winter eyes, and the temperature seemed to drop another degree. "Valor Draven," he said, "Alpha King of Frostmere, and I'm not in the habit of asking twice." Lysara looked at him, looked at the riders, looked back at him. "That's a lot of titles for a man standing in my snow," she said. "She's through there. Wipe your boots before you go in. I just cleaned the floor." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that had weight. Nobody spoke. None of the riders moved. The Alpha King of Frostmere stood in the snow and stared at a human woman who had just told him to wipe his boots. And something happened in his face that was not quite expression, not quite blankness. Something caught between the two. Then he walked to the cave entrance, bent to clear the low opening, and went inside. Lysara followed him because it was her cave and she wasn't going to stand outside it on his account. The cave was small enough that it felt smaller with him in it. He crossed to Seraphine in 3 steps and crouched down, and the quality that had been contained and cold in the open air became something else entirely in this small enclosed space. He reached out and put his hand against the old woman's face, and his expression cracked open just enough for Lysara to see what was underneath it. "Valor!" Seraphine's voice was dry and dry amused. "You're going to wake the entire mountain riding that hard. You were supposed to be in the escort. The escort was ambushed at the Silver Pass. I rode north." Seraphine's gray eyes moved to Lysara over his shoulder. "She pulled me out of the storm, set my wrist, bound my ribs. I would have been dead by midnight." Valor did not turn around immediately. When he did, the crack in his expression had closed again. He looked at Lysara with those winter sky eyes, and the cold was back. But it was a different kind of cold now, focused, sharp. "What do you want for this?" he said. Lysara blinked. "What?" "Your price, for saving her. Name it." "I don't want a price." "Everyone has a price." "I found her in the snow," Lysara said flatly. "She was dying. I'm a healer. There's no transaction." Something moved behind his eyes again. That same fast thing that vanished before she could name it. "You're human," he said. "Very observant. You're alone out here. Also very observant. No human survives the northern waste alone through the winter months." He said it like a fact he was checking against reality and finding the math strange. "Where are you from? Nowhere that concerns you?" "Lysara," Seraphine's voice carried gentle warning. "He asked an impertinent question," Lysara said, not looking away from Valor. "I gave an appropriate answer." Valor stared at her. She stared back. She'd been stared at plenty in her life. Elders who thought she'd stolen something, villagers who thought her gift was contamination, men who thought her size meant yielding. She'd developed what she privately thought of as a talent for stillness under examination. Let them look. There was nothing to find that she was ashamed of. What she hadn't expected was for the Alpha King to blink first. Not a full blink. Not defeat. Just a fractional shift, like something inside him recalibrated. "She comes with us," he said. He was talking to Seraphine, but his eyes hadn't left Lysara. "She saved my life, Valor. She doesn't have to do anything." He stopped, started again. "The men who took your escort are still operating in this region. A human, alone, healer, or otherwise." His jaw set. "She comes." "I'm standing right here," Lysara said. "I know." "Then talk to me." He turned to look at her fully, and the quality of that look was something she didn't have immediate language for. It wasn't dismissive. It wasn't threatening. It was something more unsettling than either of those things. It was the look of a man who was used to having complete maps of every situation he walked into, and who had just encountered a feature that didn't fit his cartography. "Come to Frostmere," he said. It wasn't quite an order. It wasn't quite a request. It sat in the space between. "You'll have shelter, warmth, supplies. If you want payment—" "I told you I don't want payment." "Then come, because the road is safer in numbers and you're 3 days' walk from anything resembling civilization." Lysara looked at him, looked at Seraphine, who was watching her with those sharp gray eyes, and something that might have been patience and might have been curiosity. She looked around the cave. 3 weeks of work. The pine bough insulation. The snow brick entrance. The fire she'd built from nothing. It would all still be here if she came back. The tundra didn't care either way. "Fine," she said, "but I'm bringing my packs." "Bring whatever you like," Valor said, "and I ride behind no one." The silence that followed was shorter this time. "You can ride behind my second," he said. Calder. He's steady. "What's wrong with a horse to myself?" "You don't look like you ride." "I don't look like I survived 3 weeks in the northern waste either." That fast, invisible thing behind his eyes again. "Fine," he said, and walked out of the cave. It took her 20 minutes to pack. She was thorough about it. Her medical supplies first, organized by use and fragility, wrapped in oiled cloth. Her tools. Her knives, all 4 of them, placed where she could reach them without thinking. The book she'd been working through, a battered field surgery manual she'd traded 2 days of labor for in the last market town she'd passed through. Her food stores, such as they were. When she came out, the riders were still arranged in their loose formation, and Vylor was standing apart from them, looking north at nothing, one hand resting on his horse's neck. He turned when she appeared. One of the warriors had brought a horse around for her. Not a war horse, but solid and calm and experienced looking, and she appreciated the choice without saying so. She tied her packs, checked the cinching, and mounted cleanly. She'd ridden enough in her life to manage, though not so much that she'd call it a skill. Valor moved to help Seraphine onto a gentler mount, his hands careful and impersonal and efficient in the way they were when this was something he'd done before and would do again without requiring praise for it. They moved out. Lysara rode third in the column and thought about nothing in particular, which was a lie, because she was thinking about everything. The ambush at the Silver Pass, the deliberately emptied saddlebag, the fact that Seraphine, she was sure of it now, sure in the specific way she got sure about things when enough details lined up, was not just an old woman in good furs. The fact that nobody had yet said what she actually was to this kingdom, and nobody had treated that omission as strange. They'd been riding for 2 hours when Valor pulled his horse back along the column and fell into pace beside her. He didn't speak immediately. She didn't prompt him. "How long have you been in the waste?" he said. 3 weeks. "Alone?" "That's what alone means, yes." He looked at her sidelong. Something around his jaw that wasn't quite irritation, wasn't quite amusement, wasn't quite either. "Most people don't survive the first 3 days up here without knowing the land," he said. "I'm not most people," she said, because he'd said it first. Something happened to his mouth. It was brief, and it didn't reach his eyes, but it was there. "Why were you exiled?" he said. She looked at him. "What makes you think I was exiled?" "People don't come to the northern waste because they want to," he said. "They come because every other direction was closed." She considered lying, decided against it on the grounds that it wouldn't hold and the effort wasn't worth it. "I was a healer in a village called Ashvale," she said. "I saved a child who the elders had already given last rites. They said I interfered with what was natural. They said my methods were dangerous." She kept her voice level. She'd had 3 weeks to practice keeping her voice level about this. "They voted to exile me, 12-0. My mother abstained." Silence. 12-0, he repeated. 12-0. He was quiet for a long moment, writing, looking forward. "And the child," he said. "Alive," she said. "Last I heard." Another silence, different from the first one. "The horse I've given you is called Wren," he said. "She doesn't like hard hands, light contact, and she'll go anywhere you ask." It was not an apology. It was nothing like an apology. It was a piece of practical information delivered without effect. She looked at the horse's ears. Wren, brown with a white star. "Thank you," she said. He moved his horse back up the column. They made camp that night at the base of a cliff face that broke the wind. The warriors set up with practiced efficiency. No wasted movement, no conversation beyond the functional. They looked at Lysara sideways when they thought she wasn't watching, which she was, always, the way she'd learned to watch rooms and spaces for the moments when they shifted against her. They didn't approach her. Whatever they thought of a human woman riding with the column, they kept it behind their teeth. Seraphine was given the most sheltered position near the main fire. Lysara checked her feet again and reset the poultice and got a better look at the wrist in proper firelight. The set was clean. She'd be tender for weeks, but it would heal correctly. "How did you know to do that?" Seraphine said, watching her work. "The setting." You didn't hesitate. "Field manual," Lysara said. 300 pages. I've read it 4 times. You read about it, and then you did it. First time. It was that or leave you crooked. She secured the wrap. You'd have been useless with a crooked wrist. Useless, Seraphine repeated, dry. You're not a woman who sits on the outside of things, Lysara said. You'd have hated it. Those pale gray eyes looked at her for a long moment. What do you know about Frostmere? Seraphine said. I know it's north. I know the Alpha King rules it. I know it has the largest wolf clan territory in the region and hasn't gone to open war in 11 years, which most people attribute to whoever's holding the military leash having more sense than average. Lysara paused. I didn't mean to attribute that to him specifically. Yes, you did. She said nothing. He is, Seraphine said, smarter than average, harder than he looks, which is remarkable since he looks very hard. And he is... She paused, choosing words carefully. Unaccustomed to people who don't yield to him. Most people yield. All people yield. It's what they do. Even the ones who think they won't, they get in front of him and they recalibrate. Seraphine watched her face. You didn't. He gave me no reason to. He's the Alpha King. He's a man in my cave asking impertinent questions, Lysara said. The title doesn't change the question. Seraphine was quiet for a moment. You should know what I am, she said then. You're his mother, Lysara said. Seraphine blinked. It was the first time she'd shown pure surprise. How, the way he touched your face when he came in, Lysara said. The way he didn't explain himself to you. The way you said his name like you'd been saying it that exact way his entire life. She looked up. Also the sigil on your inner wrist. I saw it when I was checking your hands. Queen Mother's sigil of Frostmere. Unless the illustrations in the books I've read are significantly wrong. Seraphine looked at her for a long time. You're going to be trouble, she said. I've heard that before. I imagine you have. Lysara tied off the bandage. Stood. Get some sleep, she said. Your body's still spending everything it has on the cold damage. It needs to stop working and repair. Lysara. She paused. My son is going to watch you, Seraphine said. Not because he distrusts you, because you're a problem he doesn't have a map for yet, and he will not rest until he does. Lysara considered that. He can look as much as he wants, she said. There's nothing there that'll answer his questions the way he's hoping. She went to set up her own sleeping area, at the edge of the camp, the way she'd been sleeping for 3 weeks. Close enough to the fire for warmth, far enough from the center that she could see all approaches. Old habit. Ashvale habit, actually, learned from the years of sleeping in a house where the welcome was conditional. She was almost settled when she became aware of him. Valor was standing at the fire, not looking at her. He was technically looking at the flames, but the quality of his stillness said he knew exactly where she was. She pulled her blanket over her shoulder and closed her eyes. In her last moment of wakefulness, she thought about what Seraphine had said. A problem he doesn't have a map for. Good, she thought. She'd spent her whole life being drawn on other people's maps, in the margins, in the blank spaces, labeled uncertain or danger or leave alone. She was tired of being charted by people who'd already decided what the territory meant. Let him look. He wasn't going to find what he expected. 2 days into the ride toward Frostmere, at the edge of a frozen gorge where the path narrowed to single file, the lead rider suddenly pulled his horse up hard. Lysara was 5th in line. She stood in her stirrups and looked ahead. 4 figures on the path, cloaked, still, not moving aside. Valor's hand went up, closed fist, sharp, and the column stopped. In the silence that followed, the wind moved through the gorge like a held breath being released. "Move aside," Valor said. One of the figures stepped forward. "We're not here for you, King," the figure said. The voice was male, rough, carrying the flat accent of the border clans. "We're here for the human." Everything happened very fast and not fast at all. Lysera's hand went to the knife at her hip. Her eyes swept the gorge walls. Figures there too, 4 or 5 on each side, and she registered that she'd been stupid. She'd been riding in the middle of a column feeling safe, and she'd stopped watching the high ground. Valor's horse shifted. "Last time," he said, and his voice was different now. Every trace of the flat, cold register she'd heard over 2 days was gone. What replaced it was something older, something that came from a different register entirely. "Move. Aside." "You don't know what she is," the man said. "You don't know what you're carrying north with you. When you find out—" "I know exactly what I'm carrying," Valor said. A beat of silence. "You can't know already," the man said. He sounded genuinely thrown. "Last warning," Valor said. The man looked at him, looked at Lysera, and in his face was something that chilled her more than the gorge walls, more than the knives at her back. He looked at her like she was something ancient, like he recognized her, like he was afraid. "The moonbound don't wake for nothing," the man said softly. "When she finds out, when she understands what she carries in her blood, nothing in Frostmere will ever be the same." Valor moved. He was off his horse before Lysera had time to process the motion, his sword clearing its scabbard with a sound like something being decided, and the column exploded into chaos around her. The man's voice cut through the noise, aimed at her, last thing she heard before the gorge filled with shouting and steel. "Ask him why he knows your bloodline, healer. Ask him what they found in the old records before he came for his mother. Ask him why a human woman who can't be killed by cold was the first thing they went looking for." Then Valor's blade found him. And silence. Lysera sat on her horse in the sudden stillness, her knife in her hand, not 1 inch of her body harmed, and stared at the Alpha King's back. He turned around. His sword was red at the tip. His face was completely expressionless in the particular way that told her the expression beneath was something he wasn't ready to show. He looked at her. She looked back. "Bandits," he said. "Eastern Border Clan. Opportunists." "That man knew my name," Lysera said. "Border clans hear things." He said moonbound. Something happened in his face. A fractional shift, there and gone. "Superstition," he said. "Old stories." She held his gaze. He held hers. And in that moment, with his warriors cleaning blades around them and Seraphine watching from 3 horses back with those sharp gray eyes that missed nothing, Lysera Vale understood with sudden cold clarity that the Alpha King of Frostmere had just lied to her face. He knew exactly who she was. He'd known before he ever reached her cave. Nobody spoke for the first 100 yards after the gorge. The column moved. Horses breathed. Steel was wiped clean and sheathed. The bodies were left where they fell because that was the kind of kingdom this was. You came at the Alpha King on the road, you stayed on the road. Lysera rode with her knife still in her hand and her eyes forward and her mind working the way it worked when she had a patient presenting symptoms that didn't add up. Methodical, cold. Strip the noise away and look at the actual facts. Fact. The man in the gorge had known her name. Fact. He had known the word moonbound, and that word had done something to Valor's face before the mask came back down. Fact. Valor had said bandits and opportunists and border clan superstition with the precise, smooth delivery of a man who had prepared exactly those words and was waiting for the moment to use them. Fact. He had reached her cave knowing his mother was in the area, in a storm that had buried every track. He had ridden directly to her. She turned the facts over, set them against each other, felt the shape of the thing they were pointing toward. She didn't like the shape. Valor rode at the head of the column. His back was straight, his shoulders set, and he had not looked at her since the gorge. That too was information. She resheathed her knife. They camped early that night. The gorge had cost them time with the cleanup and the rerouting, and by the time the light started dropping, Valor made the call to stop at a sheltered ridge rather than push the horses in failing visibility. Lysera unsaddled Ren herself, working with light, quick hands, and felt the horse lean into the brush down with the trusting weight of an animal that had decided you were safe. It was a small thing. She let it be a small thing and nothing more. She was building her section of the fire when a shadow fell across her. She looked up. Calder, Valor's second, the one she'd been paired with on the first day's ride, built like a door frame and with a face that belonged on an old coin, was standing 3 feet away holding a tin cup. "Hot water," he said. "For your herbs. The king said you have them." "The king noticed my pack contents." "The king notices most things." Calder held the cup out. His face was perfectly neutral, but his eyes had the quality of a man who was making ongoing private assessments and keeping them extremely private. She took the cup. "Thank you." He nodded once and started to leave. "Calder." He stopped. "How long has he known about me?" she said. A pause, carefully measured. "I carry messages," Calder said. "I don't read them." He walked away. She looked at the cup in her hands, thought about that answer, which was not a lie and not the truth, and was, in its way, a very precise piece of communication from a man who was loyal to his king and honest enough to be uncomfortable about it. She made her tea. She was halfway through it when Valor sat down across the fire from her. He didn't ask. He just sat, the way men sat who had never needed to ask permission to occupy a space. He poured himself water from the camp pot and drank it and looked at the fire. She let the silence run for 30 seconds. "Say what you came to say," she said. "I came to sit by the fire." "You have your own fire. Bigger one. Better position." He looked up at her. "The man in the gorge," he said. "Yes." "He was not a bandit." She waited. "He was Thornvale clan." Valor turned the cup in his hands. "Old family, northwestern border. They've been agitated the past 2 seasons. Old beliefs coming back. Old fears." "About what?" He looked at her directly. "About bloodlines. About what happens when certain bloodlines wake up." "Moonbound," she said, something in his jaw. "It's a name from old texts," he said. "Pre-kingdom histories, before the clans unified under one territory." "What does it mean?" "It means—" He stopped, started again. "There are records. Old ones. Written before most of the clans had formal archives. They describe a lineage, human on the surface, but carrying old wolf blood dormant in them, dormant for generations. The stories say it never fully died out, just went quiet." Lysara's hands were still around her cup. Her face was still. She had trained her face to be still when things were hitting her somewhere underneath. "And you think I'm one of them," she said. "I think it's possible." "Why?" "Because you survived 3 weeks in the northern waste alone," he said, "and your hands don't shake when you work on the dying, and you look at me like I'm nothing remarkable, and the last time a human woman did that—" He stopped. "When?" she said. "A long time ago." She looked at him across the fire. He was watching her with that same look she'd first seen in the cave, the problem he didn't have a map for, except now there was something layered underneath it, something that wasn't comfortable. "You knew," she said, "before you came. You already had information about me specifically." He didn't deny it. "Why?" she said. "I receive intelligence reports on unusual individuals operating near my borders. When someone survives the northern waste past the 2-week threshold, you had someone watching. You had someone watching the waste," she said, "looking for me, or for someone like me." His jaw set. "I was looking for information," he said. "Not for a person." "You found one anyway." A long silence. The fire cracked. Somewhere out in the dark, a horse shifted its weight. "I told my mother to ride north," he said. "I chose that route deliberately. If she encountered you—" The full picture arranged itself with horrible clarity. "She was bait," Lysara said. "No. She was supposed to find me. She was supposed to—" He stopped, set his cup down. "It was a calculated risk. The odds of her actually being in danger were— She had 3 broken ribs and her feet were dead white when I pulled her out of the snow." Lysara's voice was quiet. Dangerously quiet. The kind of quiet she got when she was past the point of shouting, on the other side of it where everything went very cold and very precise. You sent your mother into a blizzard to find me. I sent her on a rerouted path that happened. Don't. She stood up. Don't dress it in softer words. You used her as a way to find out if I was real, and real enough to risk, and whether I'd... She stopped because the next part was worse. Whether I'd reveal myself by saving her. Valor stood too. They were the same height when she was this close, and he wasn't on a horse, which she noted with the part of her that noted things even when everything else was on fire. Nothing happened to her that... She almost died, Lysara said. She survived worse. That is not the defense you think it is. He looked at her, jaw tight, something moving behind his eyes that was complicated and that he wasn't going to explain. Why? She said. Why do you need to know about me? What do the moonbound bloodlines mean to Frostmere that's worth that risk? His silence was a wall. Tell me, she said, or I take Ren at first light and you can ride to your kingdom without me. You can't. I can do whatever I like, she said. I'm not your subject. I'm not your soldier. I don't have a single thing I owe you or this kingdom. She held his gaze. Tell me. The fire between them was the only movement. Then Valor said, There's a war coming. She waited. Not a border skirmish, not a clan dispute. A war, the kind that ends kingdoms. He said it the way he said everything, flat and without drama, which made it hit harder than dramatics would have. The Thornvale clan has been building alliances for 2 years, old grievances, old territories they want reclaimed. They need something to unify the border clans, a cause, a symbol. He paused. Old records say the only thing that ever stopped the clan wars the first time, 400 years ago, was a moonbound, a human woman who carried the old blood. She didn't fight, she didn't lead armies, she just... He stopped. She just what? She made the bond hold, he said, between wolf clans. Moonbound bloodlines carry something in them that reinforces loyalty, deepens it, makes alliances that would otherwise fracture hold firm. She absorbed that. And the Thornvale want me, she said. The Thornvale want to use you or destroy you before someone else does. He held her gaze. There's a difference. And what do you want to do with me? A beat. Keep you from them, he said. That's not all of it. His jaw shifted. No, he said. It's not. She looked at him for a long time, long enough that one of the perimeter guards did a slow patrol pass and circled away without acknowledging either of them, which told her the guards had standing instructions about interruptions. You want the bond, she said, the reinforcement, for Frostmere. I want Frostmere's alliances to hold against what's coming, he said, using me. Working with you. You sent your mother into a blizzard, she said again, because she needed him to hear it a second time. Before you ever spoke to me. Before you knew anything about me except what your intelligence report said. You made a decision about what I was and what you needed from me, and you acted on it. Something cracked in his expression. Not much. A line. Yes, he said. Is that the first honest thing you've said to me? No. The honest things have been... He stopped. Started again. The road is genuinely safer in numbers. The horse genuinely likes light hands. Those were true. She almost laughed. It surprised her, that almost laugh, rising up at the wrong moment entirely. You're going to have to do better than that, she said. I know. She sat back down. After a moment, he sat too. The fire was lower. She fed it a stick without thinking about it, the automatic tending of someone who'd learned that fires needed consistent attention or they went out. The quiet that settled between them was different from the one before the conversation. It had different dimensions, more room in it. The kind of quiet that acknowledged two people who had just said several true things to each other and were still, for reasons that bore examination, sitting at the same fire. The bond, she said. The old records. What exactly do they say it does? Creates an anchor, he said, between the moonbound and whoever she bonds with. The clans aligned to them hold the connection. Alliances made in her presence don't fracture the way they otherwise would. And this bond, is it voluntary? He looked at her. I'm not asking as a threat, she said. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm carrying. The records say it can't be forced, he said carefully. Can it be prevented? A pause. Not if it's already started, he said. She looked at him. He looked at the fire. 3 beats of silence. It hasn't started, she said. No, he said. Something in the specific way he said no. Valor. He didn't look at her. Look at me, she said. He looked at her. In the firelight, his face was all hard lines and scar, and the particular expression of a man who had walked into a situation expecting to manage it from the outside and found himself, unexpectedly, on the inside of it. The gorge, she said slowly. You were off your horse before the man finished his sentence. He was threatening me, she said. Specifically, me. And you moved. She stopped. You moved before his hand went to his weapon. You moved when he said her name. The fire. The dark. The horses shifting out in the cold. It hasn't started, she said again, but it came out differently this time, less certain. Valor said nothing, and in his silence was the answer she didn't yet know how to hold. That night she lay in her blankets and stared at the darkness above her and thought about the shape of things. The careful trap of his mother on the road. The intelligence reports. The plan that was a plan until it wasn't, until she was sitting at his fire and he was looking at her with an expression that had cracks in it. Survival, she understood. She'd been surviving for 3 weeks in a wilderness that wanted her dead every morning. She understood doing what was necessary. She understood that the line between ruthless and practical blurred fastest under pressure, and that the people who survived were not always the ones who drew that line cleanest. Sometimes they were the ones who understood that the line moved. What she didn't understand yet was why that knowledge sat so differently in him than she'd expected. Why the cracks were there. Why a man who'd run a calculated risk with his own mother's life was sitting at a stranger's fire, looking like he'd miscalculated something, and couldn't find where. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time. Frostmere appeared on the afternoon of the next day, rising from the frozen plain like something that had grown there rather than been built. Dark stone walls, black granite pulled from the northern mountains, catching the pale winter light in a way that made them look like they were absorbing it rather than reflecting it. Towers. Battlements. A gate worked in iron and silver that stood open and watched the column approach with the expressionless weight of all gates that had been standing long enough to stop being impressed. The city inside the walls was alive. That was the first thing that hit her. She'd expected cold. She'd expected the particular hollow quiet of a kingdom built for war. Instead, the streets were dense and loud, market stalls and workshops and children running the alleys between buildings with the specific boldness of children who'd grown up somewhere that felt safe. People stopped when the column came through, bowed or ducked their heads, a few of the wolf-blooded among them. She was getting better at reading the tells, the way they held their weight, the stillness they carried in their spines, straightened and raised a fist to their chest in a gesture that was older than bowing. Valor acknowledged none of it visibly. She watched his face from 3 horses back. He watched the city. The castle was at the top of the rise. Inside its gates, the controlled efficiency of the column dissolved into organized chaos. Grooms, household staff, a steward who materialized from nowhere with a face like a man who had spent 30 years managing information. Messages came to Valor in a steady stream before he'd even dismounted. Papers and whispered words, and a young soldier who'd clearly been waiting 4 hours and looked it. Valor moved through all of it the way a river moved through obstacles, not stopping, not pausing, but also not lost. He was almost to the main entrance when he stopped and turned back to her. She was still on Ren, watching the controlled chaos and deciding where she fit inside it, which was a habit, the first thing she did in any new space. "Mara will show you to your rooms," he said. The steward materialized again, this time with the look of a man who had already been briefed. "If you need anything—" "I don't need anything," she said. His eyes moved over her face. "If you need something," he said, "Marette will find it." She held his gaze for a moment. "We're not finished with the conversation." "I know. Tonight or tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," he said. "Tonight the border reports require—" "Tomorrow," she agreed. He held her gaze for 1 beat longer than strictly necessary, and then he was gone, absorbed into the business of a kingdom that had been waiting for its king. She dismounted and handed Ren to the waiting groom and followed the steward into the castle. Her rooms were in this east wing, up 3 flights of stairs and past a gallery of portraits that watched her with the uniform suspicion of people who had been dead long enough to be selective about their company. The rooms themselves were large and warm and smelled of pine resin and cedar, and there was a fire already burning, and a tray of food that someone had prepared knowing the column was approaching. Marit gave her the key points in the clipped delivery of a man who respected brevity. Evening meal was taken communally in the main hall if she chose. Medical supplies could be requisitioned through him. The east wing was, he paused here, choosing his word with care, private. Private how? She said. Lord Cassian's household occupies the northern wing, Maret said. The eastern wing is the king's personal corridor. Another careful pause. He does not typically house guests here. She looked at him. He returned the look with the perfected blankness of a man who had said exactly what he intended to say and would not be expanding on it. Thank you, she said. He left. She stood in the middle of the warm room and looked at the fire and felt the specific particular weight of being inside walls again after 3 weeks of open sky. It pressed on her differently than she'd expected. Not suffocating. More like she felt findable. Like she had an address now, a location, a place where she could be located. She was still standing there when the door opened without a knock. The woman who entered was young, hard-faced, dressed in the formal gray of a noble household, and she looked at Lysera with an expression that had been constructed specifically to convey, in the most controlled possible way, that she found her presence in this corridor deeply objectionable. You're in the East Wing, the woman said. I am. This wing is reserved. The steward put me here. The steward follows instructions. The woman's eyes moved over Lysera, cataloging, and what she found didn't improve her expression. You're the human. I'm a human, Lysera said. I'd be careful about using the article like that. It says more about you than it says about me. A beat of silence. My name is Lady Vasha Thornvale, the woman said. My father is a senior counsel of this court. Thornvale. Lysera kept her face still. Lady Vasha, she said, the northern waste is not a place that breeds people with the manners to occupy this castle. Vasha said it pleasantly, in the particular tone that meant it wasn't pleasant at all. If I were you, I'd remember where I came from and set appropriate expectations for where I'm permitted to go. If you were me, Lysera said, you'd have been dead 3 weeks ago. Vasha's eyes sharpened. The king will tire of novelty, she said softly. He always does, and when he does, you'll still be in the north wing, Lysera said, talking to people in their doorways without knocking. Good evening, Lady Vasha. She closed the door, stood with her back against it. Thornvale. The gorge. The man's face. The way he'd looked at her like something ancient and feared. She was standing in a castle that had at least one Thornvale family embedded in its court, in a wing the steward had placed her in deliberately, in rooms that had been warmed and stocked before she arrived. She crossed to the window. The city spread below her, dark and lit with scattered fire, alive with the hum of 10,000 people going about the business of living. Beyond the walls, the plain stretched north and white and endless under the first stars. She pressed her fingers to the cold glass and thought about bloodlines, about bonds that couldn't be forced but could apparently begin without permission, about a king who had run a calculated risk and miscalculated the thing that couldn't be calculated, about the Thornvale family inside these walls, with access to the court, to the council, to the king, about the man in the gorge who had not been a bandit and had known her name and had been cut down before he finished his sentence. What had he been about to say? Ask him what they found in the old records before he came for his mother. She turned from the window. There were old records in every castle, libraries, archives, rooms where the histories were kept that weren't meant for public reading. She'd been in Frostmere for 4 hours. She didn't know its corridors, its rhythms, its locked doors, but she knew how to find things. She'd been finding things in places that didn't want her since she was 12 years old, and teaching herself medicine from stolen books in a village that thought she was dangerous. She was good at finding things, and tomorrow, Valor Draven was going to sit across from her and answer her questions. But tonight she was going to find out what questions she should be asking. She picked up her coat. She was 3 steps from the door when it opened again. Not Vasha this time, a young page, breathless from running, holding a folded note on a silver tray. She took it, broke the seal, read the 4 words inside. Don't go to the library. No signature. She turned the paper over. Nothing. She looked at the page. Who gave you this? A woman, my lady, in the main hall. She said to give it directly to you. What did she look like? The page thought. Old. Silver hair. She was sitting by the fire in the great hall, and she looked like she wasn't supposed to be out of bed. Seraphine. Lysera looked at the note. Don't go to the library. Which meant Seraphine knew she was going to go to the library. Which meant Seraphine knew something was in it. Which meant the library was exactly where she needed to go. She tucked the note into her coat and walked out the door. The library was on the 2nd level of the castle's west tower, behind a door that wasn't locked. That was the first thing that felt wrong. A room full of pre-kingdom histories and old bloodline records. In a castle that locked its grain stores and its weapons cache and its diplomatic correspondence, and the library door swung open at a touch. Either nobody thought these records mattered enough to protect, or someone had decided recently that a lock would attract more attention than its absence. Lysera stood in the doorway for 3 seconds, reading the room the way she read Patience. What was present? What was absent? What had been disturbed and returned to almost right? The library was long and narrow, shelved floor to ceiling on both sides, with a table running the center and 2 oil lamps burning low at the far end. Someone had been here recently. The lamp wicks were too fresh. The chair at the far end was angled 2 inches off the table's edge, the small displacement of someone who had risen in a hurry. She went in. She didn't go to the shelves immediately. She went to the table first and looked at the surface. A faint rectangle of less dust in the center, a book or a stack of papers that had been sitting there long enough to leave a shadow, now removed. Recent. Within the last day. Someone had cleaned this table of something before she arrived. She turned to the shelves. The organization was old and consistent up to a point, then inconsistent in a specific section on the 3rd shelf from the bottom, on the east wall, where the spines were slightly misaligned, not randomly, but in the way of books that had been pulled and replaced multiple times without full attention to order. She crouched down and read the spines. Regional histories, clan genealogies, territorial surveys going back 2 centuries. She pulled the most handled one. Its spine was cracked in 3 places, and the cover had the soft, worn texture of something that had been opened repeatedly by hands that knew what they were looking for. Clan bloodlines of the Northern Territories, pre-unification period. She sat down on the floor with it and started reading. The first 40 pages were dry genealogical records, the kind of documentation that accumulated in kingdoms because someone always needed to prove something to someone. Succession tables, marriage alliances, land transfers. She moved through them quickly, eyes scanning for anything that broke the pattern. She found it on page 47. A section shorter than the surrounding entries and written in a different hand, tighter and more careful, as if the writer was aware of the weight of what they were committing to the page. The moonbound lineage, origins, and properties. She read it once fast, then again slowly with her finger tracing the lines. It was worse than Valor had told her. Not because the bond was violent or forced. It wasn't. The text was explicit about that. The bond could not be manufactured or coerced. But the scale of it. The range. A moonbound who bonded with an alpha of sufficient bloodline didn't just reinforce that alpha's alliances. She became structurally integrated with the pack's loyalty architecture. Every wolf who pledged to the alpha would feel the moonbound's presence as a weight in the bond. Not controlling, not commanding, but present. Real. Impossible to fully separate. It ran both directions. She read that line 3 times. The bond ran both directions. The moonbound felt the alpha's pack the same way. Every loyalty, every breaking of loyalty, every fracture. She sat with that for a moment. Then she read the last paragraph of the section, which was the one the careful tight hand had written with the most care, and her hand went still on the page. The moonbound does not choose the bond. The bond chooses the moment. It begins in proximity and necessity, and once begun, separation does not dissolve it. Separation sharpens it, until the moonbound and her bonded alpha either complete the connection or destroy each other trying to prevent it. She closed the book, sat in the low lamplight with the cold of the stone floor coming through her coat, and thought about a man who had moved off his horse before a weapon was drawn, who had said it hasn't started with the particular careful emphasis of someone managing a statement that was only partially true. She put the book back in its place. She was reaching for the lamp to take it with her when she heard voices in the corridor outside. She went still. 2 voices. One she didn't recognize. One she did. Cassian. She'd met Cassian once, briefly, at the communal evening meal she'd attended on the first night. A lord of the mid-rank, pleasant-faced, with the kind of easy warmth that men deployed when they wanted to be underestimated. He'd been cordial to her in the specific way of someone performing cordiality rather than feeling it, and she'd filed him away as someone to watch without knowing why. She knew why now, standing very still in the dark of the library, with one hand on the shelf and the lamplight too low to reach the door. "Can't wait past the new moon," the unknown voice was saying. Low. Male. Older. The Thornvale window closed. Vasha's access to the king is already being reduced. He's keeping the human too close, too visible. "He doesn't know what she means yet," Cassian said. He was speaking quietly, but not in the register of a man who thought he might be overheard. He was speaking in the register of a man in a room he believed was empty. He has suspicions. He hasn't confirmed. He will. The records are clear enough for anyone who... The relevant records are no longer in the library. A pause. Where are they? Somewhere he won't think to look for them in time. Silence. Then, Vasha says he's already... Vasha says too much, Cassian said, flat and cold in a way that didn't match his pleasant face, a dissonance that hit Lysara in the chest like cold water. Tell the Thornvale to keep her away from the human. Every confrontation is a data point. He reads data points. The transfer is arranged for 3 nights from now. Northern Road during the border patrol gap. If the human is at the castle, she will be. I'll make sure of it. A beat of silence. And if the king discovers... He won't, Cassian said. He trusts me. That's his miscalculation, not mine. She stood in the dark and did not move and felt the shape of the thing fully assembled for the first time, every piece in its place. Cassian was Thornvale aligned. He had the records. He was arranging a transfer. Her transfer. She was not confused about what the human referred to. 3 nights. And he was going to keep her in the castle and keep Valor trusting him until the gap in the patrol opened. She waited until the voices moved away down the corridor, waited another 2 minutes after that, counted each one. Then she went back to the east wing. She did not sleep. By the time gray light started working through the window, she had a plan and she didn't like it, and she understood that not liking a plan was not the same as having a better one. She went to find Valor before the castle was properly awake. He was already up. Of course he was. He was in the small council room off the main hall, standing at a table covered in maps with a cup of something hot in one hand and the look of a man who had not slept long or well. Calder was there. 2 others she recognized as senior household officers. They all looked at her when she came through the door. "I need to speak to you," she said. "Alone." Valor looked at her face. He looked at his officers. "Out," he said. They left without comment. Calder pulled the door behind him. Valor set down his cup. "What happened?" "I went to the library last night." Something crossed his face. "I told Seraphine to..." "You told Seraphine to tell me not to go," she said. "Which is not the same as you telling me and also not the same as telling me why." His jaw set. "What did you find?" he said. "I found what you'd already pulled from the shelves was missing," she said. "And I found enough of what was left to understand the bond better than you've explained it to me." She held his gaze. "But that's not why I'm here." She told him what she'd heard, clean and factual, the way she delivered diagnoses. No editorializing, no emotion in the voice, just the information in the order that made its implications clearest. Cassian, the Thornvale, the transfer, 3 nights, the patrol gap. She watched his face while she talked. She'd seen people receive bad news before. In her work, bad news was regular. There was a specific expression that crossed people's faces in the first second, before they controlled it, before they processed it into whatever they chose to show, that was purely involuntary. Pure response. She'd gotten very good at reading it. What crossed Valor's face when she said Cassian's name was not surprise. It was confirmation. Something he'd been hoping was wrong, confirmed. The distinction hit her somewhere unexpected. He was quiet for a long moment after she finished, looking at the maps on the table, not seeing them. "How long?" she said. "I've had suspicions," he said, "for 1 season. Not enough to act on, not proof." "You have proof now." "I have your account of a conversation." "Is that not enough?" "It's enough for me," he said. "It's not enough for a formal accusation against a lord of this court." He paused. "Cassian's family has been in this castle for 30 years. His father served my father. If I move against him on insufficient ground, he's going to hand me to the Thornvale in 3 nights, she said. "I know." "And you're worried about insufficient ground." "I'm worried about the 16 other noble houses who will watch how I handle insufficient ground and decide how much of their loyalty is actually stable." He looked at her directly. "A king who moves on suspicion against an entrenched family gives every other entrenched family a reason to watch their backs. And a court that's watching its back is a court that's already half gone." She looked at him. He looked back. "So you've known for a season," she said slowly, "that Cassian was possibly compromised. And you, what? You kept him close, kept him trusting, waited." "I waited for proof, and used the waiting time to gather information, yes, to let him operate while I watched where he went and who he spoke to." He said it without apology, because a man who had grown up inside the calculus of power didn't apologize for the calculus. That's how you find the full network. Pull one thread too early, and the rest scatter. "You use the people around you," she said. It wasn't an accusation this time. It was something she was examining, turning over, looking at the underside of. "When I have to. Your mother, Cassian, me." He was quiet. "Yes," he said. It was the same honesty as the night before. Flat, uncommented on, offered like a stone placed on a table. She thought about the book, the bond that ran both directions, the way he'd moved in the gorge, the way his face had cracked when she'd said your mother almost died. He was a man who did what the situation required. He'd been doing it so long it had become architecture, built into the walls of him, the foundational load-bearing kind that couldn't be removed without bringing something down. And somewhere inside that architecture, something had developed a crack that he didn't have a map for either. She understood him, she realized, in the specific way she understood difficult patients. Not sympathetically, not yet, but clearly. The mechanics of him. Why the gears turned the way they turned. It did not make her feel better about the 3 nights. "You can't arrest him now," she said. "No. And you can't move me without tipping him off that you know." "Moving you changes his timeline," Valor said. "He accelerates. The network scatters before I have the full picture." "So I stay." "So you stay, and So I stay, and I'm the bait again," she said. The word landed between them. He didn't flinch from it. He absorbed it, the way he absorbed most things, with his face still and his jaw set and whatever was happening underneath not visible. "I won't let the transfer happen," he said. "I will have—" "What if you miscalculate?" she said. "What if the patrol gap is earlier than you think, or Cassian moves in 2 nights instead of 3? What if the network is deeper than you've mapped, and there are people in this castle I don't know to watch?" His silence was the answer. "You're asking me to trust you," she said. "Yes. After telling me you've been running calculations about me since before we met." "Yes. Give me one reason." He looked at her for a long moment. The maps, the cold morning light, the untouched cup of something that had gone cold while they talked. "Because I'm telling you," he said. "I didn't have to tell you any of it. The bond, the records, Cassian. I could have managed it without your knowledge, and it would have been cleaner, operationally." Something moved in his face. "I'm telling you because you asked, and because you deserve." He stopped. "Because it's yours to know." She held his gaze. The crack again. The thing under the architecture. She made her decision. 3 nights, she said. I'll stay in position. I'll give you the time. But you tell me every piece of information you have on the network today before midday. Everything. I'm not operating blind inside your walls." "Agreed." "And Valor." He waited. If Cassian gets me out of this castle, she said quietly, if the transfer happens and you have to come after me, don't make the same mistake twice. What mistake? The calculation, she said, the clean operational management. If you have to come, come like you came to the gorge. She held his gaze. Not because it's strategic. Something happened in his face that she didn't have a name for yet, but that she would remember. I'll be at your session in an hour, he said. She left. She walked back through the castle corridors with the cold morning air coming through the arrow-slit windows and the sounds of the household waking up around her, and she thought about what she'd just done. Agreed to be bait, stayed inside a compromised castle, put her safety in the hands of a man who, by his own account, ran calculations on everything and everyone, and thought about what he'd said, because it's yours to know. There had been no calculation in that sentence. That was the problem. That was the crack she needed to stop looking at before it became something she couldn't manage. She was almost back to the east wing when Cassian appeared at the corridor junction ahead of her, coming from the direction of the north wing with the easy, unhurried pace of a man with nowhere pressing to be. He saw her and smiled, open, warm, genuine-looking. Lysera, early morning. Couldn't sleep, she said. New place, he said pleasantly. Takes time. The castle has its own sounds. He fell into step beside her with the practiced naturalness of a man who had been performing ease for 30 years. How are you settling in? The East Wing treating you well? Very well, she said. Good. Good. A pause. The king speaks highly of your skills. What you did for the Queen Mother? Remarkable. She's a resilient woman. She is. Another pause. Lighter, almost casual. You know, if you need someone to help you navigate the court, introductions, who to know, the dynamics of it, I'm happy to assist. It can be difficult coming in from outside. She looked at him. His face was perfect. Warm, open, concerned in a collegial way. Nothing in it that she could point at. That's very kind, she said. Not at all. He smiled again. We take care of our own here, even new arrivals. He branched off at the next junction with a small wave, and she watched him go, and thought about the particular skill required to smile that cleanly at someone you were planning to sell. She'd always known the world had people like him in it. She'd just never been the specific product before. That evening, she sat in the castle library, officially, visibly, with permission this time, the door propped open and a lamp burning high, and worked through the remaining records that hadn't been removed, building her own map of what she was. The moonbound records were fragmentary. Someone across several generations had been careful about what survived. But the fragments were enough to understand that what she carried in her blood was not passive, not decorative. It was old, pre-civilization old. The kind of old that didn't care about kingdoms or kings or the careful architecture of men who thought they'd mapped everything. She was halfway through the third document when she felt it. A low vibration at the base of her sternum, like a string being plucked. Faint, almost not there. She pressed her hand flat against her chest. In the hallway outside, Veilor walked past the open door. He stopped, looked in. She looked back. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them needed to. The vibration was there again, low and insistent and completely indifferent to either of their opinions about it. Not yet, the book had said. She was increasingly of the view that not yet was doing a great deal of work. Veilor held her gaze for 3 seconds. His face did the thing where the crack showed for a moment, and then he walked on, and the sound of his boots on the stone floor faded down the corridor. She turned back to the document. Separation sharpens it. 2 nights left, one traitor smiling at her over breakfast. One bond she hadn't agreed to, moving in her chest like a tide deciding which way to run. She pressed her hand against the page and breathed, and chose, the way she'd been choosing her whole life, under pressure, without guarantees, to keep her eyes open. Whatever was coming, she would meet it knowing exactly what she was. She was still reading when the candle burned to its base, and the library went dark around her, and somewhere on the other side of the castle walls, the northern wind picked up and began to build towards something. The second night passed without incident. That was the wrong kind of quiet. Lysera had learned the difference between quiet that meant nothing was happening and quiet that meant everything was being arranged for later. The castle hummed with its usual rhythms, guards rotating, kitchen fires banked, the distant sound of the stables at the hour before dawn. All of it normal. All of it slightly too normal, the way a room full of people pretending not to watch you had a specific quality of inattention that was its own kind of looking. She slept in short intervals with her knives where her hands could find them and her coat on. At the breakfast hour, she sat across the long table from Cassian and ate dried fruit and dark bread, and watched him be charming to 3 different people in the span of 20 minutes. He was very good at it. The warmth never slipped. The attention never wandered at the wrong moment. She would have found it impressive in a clinical way if it hadn't been directed at the project of moving her out of this castle in a sack. He glanced at her once. She gave him a small, tired smile. The performance of a woman who hadn't slept well and wasn't paying attention to anything more complicated than her breakfast. He returned it and went back to his conversation. Good, she thought. Let him think she was exactly that. Valor was not at the breakfast table. He'd been absent from the communal meals since their early morning meeting 2 days ago, and she knew from Murray that he was running the border intelligence through his senior officers in rotating sessions, working the full map of the Thornvale network while the window was still open. She'd given him her account in detail. He'd given her his in return, the full shape of it. 17 months of quiet intelligence, 3 confirmed contacts inside the castle walls, 2 more suspected. Cassian, at the center of it, trusted, well-positioned, patient in the way that only truly dangerous people were patient. She hadn't seen Valor alone since. She felt his presence in the castle the same way she felt weather coming, not directly, not loudly, but as a shift in the quality of the air around the thing. The bond, moving in her chest like slow water looking for the lowest ground. She had stopped fighting the awareness of it. That was its own kind of decision. She finished her breakfast and went to check on Seraphine. The Queen Mother was up and dressed and seated by the window of her rooms, with her fractured wrist elevated and her color almost fully restored, looking out at the courtyard with the expression of a woman calculating multiple things simultaneously. "You're not supposed to be out of bed," Lysara said. "I've been out of bed for 40 years, Seraphine said. "It hasn't killed me." Lysara checked the wrist. The swelling was down. She rewrapped it with lighter binding and felt Seraphine watching her face the whole time. "You went to the library," Seraphine said. "You told me not to." "And you went anyway." "You told me not to in a way that told me I should," Lysara said. "You knew I'd go. You knew what I'd find, and you knew what I'd hear. You sent the note so I'd know to be careful while I was there, not so I'd stay away." A pause. "You're going to be very difficult," Seraphine said, with something in her voice that wasn't quite complaint. "I've heard that recently." Seraphine's eyes moved to the window. The courtyard below was busy with the morning's work, grooms and household staff crossing in the thin winter light. "He hasn't slept," she said. "Since you told him about Cassian, he's been running the response in his head every hour." A pause. "He does that. He plans until the plan is perfect, and then he discovers that reality doesn't honor perfect plans, and he has to start over." "I know," Lysara said. "He's going to try to manage this without you being in danger." "I know that too." "He won't be able to." "I know," Lysara said for the 3rd time, and Seraphine looked at her, and whatever she found in Lysara's face seemed to settle something. "He hasn't bonded before," Seraphine said quietly. "Not even close. I'd started to think it was something in him, the control, the architecture of him, that he'd simply closed it off." She looked at Lysara directly. "He hasn't." Lysara said nothing. "I'm telling you because you should know," Seraphine said, "not because I'm asking you to do anything with it." "Seraphine." "Yes." "Stop telling me things that make it harder to think clearly," Lysara said. A beat of silence. "All right," Seraphine said. Lysara left her and walked the east corridor and counted the things she knew. Tonight was the 3rd night. The patrol gap was 2 hours before midnight. Cassian would need to move her before then, which meant sometime after the evening meal and before the 3rd-hour bell. That was a window of roughly 90 minutes in which she would be, theoretically, unprotected and accessible. She was going to have to let it start. That was the part she had been sitting with for 2 days. To be bait that worked, she had to be bait that looked real. A woman who knew she was being moved would run. A woman who didn't know would be confused, then frightened, then compliant in the short-term way of someone trying to survive long enough to think of something. She would have to perform the second one while being the first. She spent the day in the East Wing doing the work that looked like an uncertain woman settling in, organizing her medical supplies, reading, taking meals in her room, making herself findable, small, unthreatening. She was very good at being underestimated. Cassian came for her at the second hour past the evening bell. He knocked, politely. She opened the door, still holding the book she'd been reading, and he stood in the corridor with his pleasant face and a lantern in one hand and a carefully arranged expression of mild urgency. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "There's a situation. One of the kitchen workers has had an accident. They're asking for a healer. Murray thought you might be willing, given your—" "Of course," she said. She put the book down, picked up her medical bag, did not pick up her knives in a way he could see, though they were already on her, 3 of them, positioned exactly where they'd been when she went to sleep every night for the past 3 weeks. She followed him into the corridor. He led her down through the castle, away from the main hall, toward the lower passages where the service corridors ran. She tracked every turn, counted stairs, built the map inside her head with the automatic discipline of someone who'd been building exit maps since childhood. The kitchen was in the opposite direction. She said nothing. The lower passage ended at a door that led out onto the west courtyard, and beyond it was the wall gate, and beyond that was the road, and standing in the courtyard with horses already bridled were 4 men she'd never seen inside the castle before tonight. Cassian stopped, turned. His face had changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't a dramatic man, but the warmth was gone, and what was underneath it was the flat professional expression of someone executing a plan they'd committed to long ago. "I'm sorry," he said, and he sounded almost genuine. "You seem like a decent person." "You work very hard at seeming like one," she said. Something moved across his face. "You knew." 2 nights ago. He absorbed that, processed it, then looked past her at something she didn't need to turn around to know was his men coming in behind her, cutting off the corridor. "Then you know this ends the same way regardless," he said. "I know you think it does," she said. The men behind her were close. She could hear their breathing, 4 of them from the sound, 6 steps back. Cassian in front. The courtyard gate behind him with the 4 outside. This was the moment, the clean operational window exactly as planned. She understood with cold clarity why Cassian had been good at his work. He'd chosen the variables carefully, stacked them right, left nothing to chance except the part he couldn't have known, which was that the woman he was moving knew she was being moved and had been waiting for exactly this. She didn't fight. She needed to be outside the walls. She let them take her arms, let the bag be pulled away, though they left her coat, which was the mistake she'd been hoping for. She kept her face frightened blank, and her breathing shallow and fast in the register of someone running on adrenaline and no plan, and Cassian looked at her once and turned to the gate. They were through the wall and onto the northern road inside 4 minutes. 6 horses. Her on one, hands bound in front with a cord that was good work but not iron. Someone who knew to use rope on a healer, not manacles, because healers sometimes had tools. What they hadn't considered was that her knife was not in her bag. The night was clear and bitter, and the stars were white cold above the plain. The column moved fast, heading northwest, the direction of the mountain pass. She counted riders again. 6, including Cassian. The 4 from outside were Thornvale soldiers, the sigil on their chest plates catching the moonlight, stylized, old, the kind of emblem that had been on battle flags before most of the current noble houses were built. She waited. They'd been riding for 20 minutes when she heard it. Behind them, on the plain, the sound of horses. Not 1 or 2. Many. Moving at a pace that said they weren't looking for their way. They already knew it. Cassian heard it too. He pulled his horse up and turned and looked back at the dark plain, and she watched his face do the thing where a well-made plan discovers it has a flaw. "Ride," he said. Sharply, stripped of warmth entirely. They rode. The horses were good, but Valor's were better. She'd seen his animals, war-bred everyone, trained on terrain exactly like this. And the sound behind them didn't fall back. It grew. The thunder of it coming up through the frozen ground and into her bones. The Thornvale soldier beside her reached for her reins. She drove her elbow into his face, broke his grip, and pulled the knife from inside her coat with her bound hands working together, cut the cord in 2 motions, and took her reins back. The soldier made a noise, blood on his face. He reached for her again. "Touch me again," she said, and the knife was between them, and her voice was the voice she used when she needed someone to understand without negotiating. "And you'll be riding one-handed home." He pulled back. Cassian was ahead of her, not looking back now, focused on the pass. She could see it, the dark cut in the mountain face, the access road winding up to it, the fortress the Thornvale had positioned on the other side. If they made the pass, Valor's riders would lose them in the terrain. She looked behind her. The first riders crested the low ridge half a mile back. She recognized Valor's horse by the way it ran, which was ridiculous. She'd ridden with this animal for 2 days, and she recognized it by its gait in the dark. He was riding like the tundra owed him the ground beneath it, and his riders fanned behind him in the formation she'd watched take shape outside her cave. The contained extension of a single will spreading into disciplined force. She understood, watching it, something she hadn't had language for before. He was not coming because she was strategically important. He was not running calculations. A man running calculations chose angles and timing and the most efficient vector. He had come in a straight line, the shortest path between where he was and where she was, and he was not slowing down. Cassian's riders hit the approach road to the pass. The gradient slowed them. Valor's column hit the flat ground below at full stride. She pulled her horse wide of the Thornvale soldier and let the animal open up on the slope, riding with everything she had, which wasn't elegant but was fast, and behind her the night filled with the sounds of 2 forces converging on the same piece of ground. The pass entrance was a narrow channel, 2 horses wide at most, flanked by rock faces that turned sound into something physical. She heard the collision before she fully understood it, the crash of horses and men and drawn steel, shouting in 2 registers, the flat, decisive sounds of a fight that didn't have time for drama. Cassian made the channel. She was 20 yards behind him. The Thornvale soldiers at the rear were turning back to meet Valor's riders, which opened the gap ahead, and she pushed her horse through it and came up through the channel into the wider approach road beyond. And there was the fortress. Dark stone, torch-lit gates, a structure built into the mountain like the mountain had grown around it. Cassian was already at the gates when she cleared the channel. He turned his horse and looked at her, and the calculation on his face was clear. He had her, and he didn't need the others. She pulled her horse up hard, 30 yards between them. Behind her, the channel was choked with fighting. In front of her was a fortress with walls and numbers and everything that made running forward worse than staying still. She looked at Cassian. He looked at her. "It's already done," he said. He had a blade out now, long cavalry steel, held easy in the way of a man who'd trained since childhood. "Whatever he told you, he could offer you. Frostmere is finished. When the Thornvale consolidate, there won't be a—" The sound that came from behind her was not fighting anymore. It was something older. She turned. Valor had cleared the channel. He had blood on his face from the push-through, and his sword was out and red at the edge, and he'd lost his outer coat somewhere in the narrows, riding in just leather and armor in the killing cold, and none of that appeared to be information he was processing. He was looking at Cassian with the expression of a man who had run his calculations for the last time on this particular subject and was now on the other side of them, where the only thing left was the fact. He looked at her first. 1 second, top to bottom. "Move left," he said. She moved left. Valor drove his horse forward. Cassian was good. She'd give him that, watching the next 30 seconds from 6 feet off the line. He was trained and he was quick, and he'd clearly planned for this contingency, parrying the first 2 strikes with the efficiency of someone who'd prepared for exactly this. But there was a difference between a man who was good and a man who had been forged, and Valor Draven was the second kind, and the difference showed in the 3rd exchange, and then the 4th, where Cassian's defense started costing him more than it bought. The fortress gates were opening. She saw it before Valor did, the Thornvale reinforcements coming through, 8 soldiers, 10 moving fast down the approach road toward the fight. "Valor," she shouted. He'd seen it. He was already breaking off the engagement, pulling his horse wide, putting ground between himself and Cassian. His remaining riders, 3 had made the channel, fanned into a blocking line. 3 against 10 was not a fight. It was a statement about how long you wanted to buy. Cassian had regrouped, blood from a cut on his arm, but nothing that would slow him. He looked at the blocking line, at the fortress soldiers coming up behind, at Valor standing between him and Lysera, and his face did the arithmetic. "You're on the wrong side of the numbers, Valor," he said. Valor didn't look at the soldiers coming up behind him. He looked at Lysera. She looked back. She felt it then. Not the low undercurrent vibration she'd been managing for 4 days, but the full weight of it, cresting, the bond snapping into focus between them like a line pulled taut, clear as cold water, undeniable as hunger. His eyes changed. Yeah, felt it too. She knew he did from the way his face shifted, the crack splitting open fully for the first time, every calculation stripped away, and underneath it, the thing that had been there since the gorge, since the cave, since he'd chosen the honest answer every time she'd pushed him for one. The fortress soldiers hit the line. He turned back into the fight. She had 3 seconds to understand what she was looking at. 6 men pushing through a line of 3, Cassian repositioning to Valor's flank, the angles closing, and she understood with the same cold clarity she brought to every crisis that the only variable in this equation that wasn't fixed was her. She was not a soldier, she had no armor. She had a knife, and 3 weeks of surviving the worst place in the north and the specific ruthless practicality of a woman who had been left to die twice and had decided, both times, that dying was not an acceptable outcome. She kicked her horse forward. She had no plan beyond the one immediate truth. She was not going to stay on the outside of this fight while Valor bled inside it. The first soldier between her and the line didn't expect the healer to ride at him. That was his problem. She came in from the right angle, drove her horse into his, and while he was managing his animal, she put the knife where it needed to go. Not killing, she was a healer, and her hands did not do that without something breaking in her, but painful and disabling and final enough that he was no longer useful to anyone tonight. She pulled through. Cassian turned at the sound of her, and across the chaos of the courtyard, over the bodies and the torchlight and the grinding noise of a fight that was still deciding itself. Valor looked at her with those pale winter eyes, and the crack in his face was fully open, and she understood that the word she'd been reaching for, the one she hadn't had language for since the cave, since the fire, since "don't go to the library" written in a hand she now knew was Seraphine's. The word was not strategic. The word was not calculation. He drove through the 2 soldiers between him and Cassian, and the sounds of that collision went through the courtyard like a door being kicked off its hinges. And she wheeled her horse and put herself at his back, and held the line with the knife and the cold and everything she had, and the night pressed in from all sides. Cassian was down. The remaining Thornvale soldiers were recalculating. The fortress gate was still open, and from inside it, from the deep dark of the structure beyond, came a sound she didn't recognize. Not horses, not soldiers. Something lower. A horn, old made. The kind of instrument that carried across mountains. Valor straightened. His face went still in a completely different way than she'd ever seen it go still before. "What is that?" she said. He looked at the open gate. "The Thornvale emergency summons," he said. "It calls every family member and allied clan within half a day's ride." He looked at her, and the calculation was back in his face, but different now, layered, his eyes moving over the variables with the speed of a man who'd been trained to do this under pressure. "They're not retreating, they're escalating." She looked at the gate, at the dark beyond it, at the narrow channel behind them where the rest of his riders were still fighting through. 4 of them on the wrong side of a fortress that was about to receive reinforcements from every direction, with Cassian's body on the ground and the Thornvale network fully activated and nowhere to run that led back to Frostmere before the roads were covered. She looked at him. "Tell me you have a plan," she said. He looked at her. In the torchlight and the blood and the killing cold, with the horn still rolling its deep note across the mountains and the sound of riders starting somewhere far out in the dark, he looked at her and said nothing. And the nothing was the most frightening thing he'd ever given her. The horn rolled its last note across the dark mountains and went silent. In that silence, Valor looked at the fortress gate and did what Lysera had watched him do every time the variables shifted against him. He stripped the situation down to its actual facts and worked forward from there. Not from where he'd planned to be or where he'd wanted to stand, but from the exact ground beneath his feet. 4 riders. Cassian down. Thornvale reinforcements inbound from every allied direction within half a night's ride. One open gate and a fortress built into rock that would take siege equipment and a week to reduce conventionally. But the gate was open. "Marin," he said without turning. His remaining rider, the one she'd learned was the most senior of the three who'd cleared the channel, pulled up beside him. "How many inside?" "We came through fast. 10, maybe 12 before the gate soldiers came out." Marin's voice was flat and professional in the way of someone who processed crisis as information. "Could be more in the interior." "Armory position. Eastern wall, ground level. Saw the doors when we came in." Valor looked at the gate. Lysara understood what he was thinking before he said it. "You want to go in," she said. "The reinforcements are half a night out," he said. "If we're still outside when they arrive, we're trapped against the mountain with no cover and no supply. If we're inside, we hold the fortress," she said. "We hold the gate, long enough for my riders to come through the pass." "How many are still in the channel?" 8, maybe 10, depending on casualties. 8 against a fortress network's worth of incoming clan soldiers. Her medical mind ran the arithmetic on that before her strategic mind had time to frame it differently, and the numbers were not comfortable numbers, but they were better than 4 in the open. "Inside then," she said. He looked at her. The crack in his face was still there, she realized. It hadn't closed back up after the courtyard. Something had shifted in the architecture of him, some load-bearing wall that had finally acknowledged it couldn't hold the same configuration it had been holding for years. "You stay back from the gate line," he said. "I'm a healer," she said. I belong exactly at the gate line." "Lysara, someone has to keep your people functional long enough to hold it," she said. "That's me. That's what I am. Stop trying to manage where I stand." 3 seconds. "Stay low," he said. They went in. The fortress interior was narrow and torchlit, and the 10 seconds of confusion when they pushed through the gate were the 10 seconds everything depended on. Baelor first, with Marin flanking, the other 2 riders behind, and Lysara inside the gate arch with her knife and her back to the wall, and her eyes moving continuously across the interior for anyone she needed to be aware of. The courtyard fight was brutal and short. The Thornvale soldiers inside hadn't expected the incursion from their own gate, and the coordination gap cost them the first exchange completely. By the time the gate was secured and barred from inside, 5 of them were down, and the remainder had retreated to the interior stairwell. Valor had a cut across his left shoulder that was bleeding steadily, and he hadn't mentioned it. "Sit down," she said. "Not yet." "Valor, sit. Down." He sat on the courtyard steps, and she pulled the coat away from the wound and looked at it in the torchlight and felt the particular focused calm that descended on her when the work was in front of her. The world contracting to what was damaged and what was needed, and the specific sequence of actions between those 2 facts. It was deep but clean. She packed it and bound it with strips from the extra cloth she'd kept in her coat pocket from the day she'd walked into this castle planning for contingencies. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when they needed to be. He watched her work. She felt his eyes on her face but didn't look up until she was done. When she did, he was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Not the crack. Something quieter than the crack, and more serious. "You're afraid," she said, and surprised herself saying it. "I miscalculated the timeline," he said. "The horn means they're closer than the intelligence said." "That's not what I'm talking about." He held her gaze. "No," he said. "It's not." Outside the barred gate, in the distance, she could hear the sound of fighting in the channel. His riders pushing through, getting closer. "When this is over," she said quietly, "you're going to have to learn a different way to operate." "I know. The calculation," she said, "the management, it served you. It built this kingdom and it held it together, and I'm not telling you it was wrong. I'm telling you it's not sufficient anymore." She held his gaze. "You can't calculate everything, and the parts you can't calculate are the parts that matter most." Something moved across his face, old and honest. "I know that too," he said. "Since when?" "Since a cave," he said. "Since a woman told me to wipe my boots." She looked at him for a long moment in the torchlight, with blood on both of them, and a barred gate and the sound of his riders getting louder in the channel, and felt the bond settle between them the way foundations settled. Not dramatic, not violent, just a shift into the position it had been moving toward since the beginning. Complete. She felt his pack, not in language, not in images, but as a weight, 16 loyal souls on the other side of that mountain channel, fighting toward this gate with everything they had. She felt them the way you felt a room full of people when you walked into it, the warmth and the mass of them, the quality of their commitment. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum. He was watching her. "You felt it," he said. "Yes." He looked at her hand, at her face. The quiet, serious expression deepened. "Does it?" he started. "It doesn't hurt," she said. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" She thought about the book, the pre-kingdom histories, the careful, tight handwriting of someone who'd understood the weight of what they were describing. "Something imposed," she said. "Something that happened to me regardless." She looked at him. "It doesn't feel like that." "What does it feel like?" She thought about how to say it in a way that was honest. "Like recognizing," she said. The gate shuddered on its bar as something hit it from outside. Not Thornvale, the sound was wrong for that. It was the specific cadence of a signal knock, the kind used by soldiers who needed to be identified fast. Marin was at the bar before Valor stood. 8 riders came through, then 2 more behind them, one supporting the other. The channel was cleared, 12 total, against a fortress that had maybe 7 Thornvale soldiers in its interior and reinforcements still half a night out. The arithmetic had shifted. Valor stood and his face shifted with it, back into command, the crack not closing but contained, held alongside the work the way a man learned to carry something without putting it down. Marin, interior sweep, eastern stair first, armory secured. Reld, get people on the wall and tell me the moment you see movement on the plain. He looked at the 2 injured riders being helped across the courtyard. "Bring them to me," he said to Lysera. She was already moving. She worked for the better part of an hour, moving between the injured with the fortress's own medical supplies supplementing hers. She found them in the room off the main hall, which told her this fortress had been preparing for sustained occupation, not just a transfer. Bandages, field medicine, the kind of supply cache that didn't happen by accident. She cataloged that information and kept working. 3 riders with wounds that needed cleaning and closing. One with a broken forearm, she set the same way she'd set Seraphine's wrist, fast and efficient and without ceremony because there wasn't time for ceremony. One with a head wound that she sat with for 20 minutes watching his pupils before deciding he was concussed but not dangerously. Valor came through twice. The second time he stopped beside her. "Reld says the plane is clear," he said. "Either the Horn's network is slower than the records indicated, or Cassian hadn't fully activated it yet," she said. "If the transfer wasn't complete, he may have called the emergency signal too early." He was quiet. "If that's true," he said, "then the network doesn't know the full situation yet. They know there's an emergency at the fortress. They don't know it's been taken." She looked at him. "How long does that buy us?" "Until someone arrives and reports back." He paused. 6 hours. Maybe 8. "Your army?" 4 hours out, he said. "If Calder followed the contingency protocol I put in place the day you told me about Cassian." "Did he?" "Calder always follows protocol," he said, and something in his voice that was the closest thing to warmth she'd heard from him talking about another person. The next hours had this particular quality of sustained, held breath. The fortress was theirs, completely. Once the interior sweep drove the remaining Thornvale soldiers out through the mountainside access door, and Marin barred it behind them. Valor's people set the walls and the gate and settled into the careful economy of a unit that knew how to wait without burning itself out in the waiting. Lysera sat in the main hall with her patient who needed watching and listened to the fortress breathe around her. She thought about Ashvale, not with the raw, wound quality it had carried for the first weeks. The exile, the circle of elders, the carefully arranged not quite grief on her mother's face. She thought about it like a country she'd left. Real, formative, part of the map of her, but no longer the territory she was standing in. She'd spent 3 weeks in the northern waste learning what she was capable of when every external structure was stripped away. Not comfortable capable, not heroic capable. The grinding, daily, unglamorous capable of a person who refused to stop because stopping meant dying and dying was not acceptable. She'd learned that her hands didn't shake when they needed to be steady, and that loneliness was a condition she could endure without it destroying her, and that the voice that said you're nobody, you were always nobody, could be heard and disbelieved simultaneously. She'd thought, at the end of those 3 weeks, that she'd found the limit of herself. She had not. The limit kept moving. That was the thing about survival as a practice. It didn't leave you where it found you. It rebuilt you in increments, without asking whether you were ready for the new shape. Vylor came and sat across the table from her around the 4th hour. He'd cleaned up as much as the fortress allowed, and his shoulder was holding, though she'd check it again before the army arrived. He looked tired in the specific way of someone whose body had been running on command override for too long and was beginning to present the invoice. She pushed the water jug across the table. He poured himself a cup and drank and set it down. "I owe you an accounting," he said. "You've been giving me one incrementally since the cave," she said. "A complete one." He looked at his hands around the cup. "Everything I knew before I came for you. The full scope of it." "All right," she said. He talked for a long time. The intelligence report that had flagged an anomalous human in the northern waste, surviving past the threshold. The old records he'd found 3 seasons ago, working backward from a series of Thornvale clan movements that didn't make strategic sense until he'd understood what they were looking for. The picture that had assembled itself. A moonbound bloodline, dormant, somewhere in the human settlements scattered along the northern reach, and the Thornvale racing to find it before it was found by someone who would use it differently. He'd moved first. He'd built the plan. He'd used everything available, including his mother, including Cassian's trusted position, including the deliberate ambiguity he'd maintained with Lysera herself about what he knew and when. He said all of it, flat, without softening the edges. When he finished, he looked at her and waited. "You've said most of this already," she said. "Not the part about how early I knew," he said. "I knew from the first morning, when I walked into your cave and saw how you'd built it, the pine insulation, the snow brick, the medical arrangement, the way you'd organized for a long stay, alone, in conditions that kill trained soldiers. I knew then. And you chose not to tell me. I chose to—" He stopped. "I chose to manage the information until I understood the full situation." "Until you understood if I was useful," she said. He looked at her directly. "Yes." She held his gaze. This was the bedrock of it, she understood. Not the bond, not the bloodline, not the Thornvale or the gorge, or Cassian's pleasant face and 30 years of treachery. This was the thing underneath all of it, a man who had learned to treat everything as a variable in a calculation, including people, including himself, and who had run that system so long he'd stopped being able to see it clearly until a woman from a cave in the northern waste kept refusing to disappear into the category he'd put her in. "What was I in the original plan?" she said. "When you found the moonbound, what was I supposed to be?" He was quiet. "An asset," he said. "A strategic asset. Something that could be brought into Frostmere and positioned to stabilize the Alliance structure before the Thornvale consolidated." A pause. "Managed." "Managed," she repeated. "Yes." She looked at the table between them. The water jug. The tin cups. The stripped-down simplicity of a fortress hall that had been turned into a field hospital and a command post, and now, in this 4th-hour quiet, something else. "When did it stop being that?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. "The gorge," he said. When he said her name, his eyes came up to hers. "I was off the horse before I processed it consciously. I've been running field operations for 16 years. I don't break formation before conscious processing. I don't—" He stopped. "I've been trying to recalculate it since, and the calculation doesn't work. There's a variable it doesn't account for." "I know what the variable is," she said. "I know you do," he said. Outside on the wall, one of the riders called down. Movement on the plain, still distant, coming from the south. Frostmere colors. Calder. The army. On time. Vylor stood. She stood with him, and they walked to the gate together, and she stood at his shoulder while the signal exchanges happened and the fortress gate opened for the second time that night. This time for 500 Frostmere soldiers riding hard across the frozen plain with their breath in clouds and their weapons ready, and Calder at the front with the particular expression of a man who had followed protocol because he trusted the king who wrote it. The Thornvale reinforcements arrived 3 hours later. They arrived to a fortress they'd lost, held by an army they hadn't expected, with their network senior court operative dead in the courtyard and their emergency signal having brought them to the wrong outcome. Lysera watched from the eastern wall as the Thornvale column stopped on the approach road and the mathematics of it worked through their command structure in real time. She'd seen that specific recalculation before. The moment a plan met reality and had to rewrite itself. They retreated before dawn. Not broken, not destroyed, but reduced, the way a fire was reduced when you took away what it was burning. Still capable of being rekindled, but needing time and fuel and the decision to try again. Valor gave them terms through a writer sent out at first light. Formal, documented, witnessed by 3 senior officers and recorded in the military archive in language that left no ambiguity about what had happened and who had won and what the cost of renewed aggression would be. He did it without drama and without cruelty, in the register of a man who understood that terms that humiliated were terms that eventually broke, and he needed these terms to hold. She watched him do it and thought about what she'd said in the fortress hall. A different way to operate. He was already doing it differently. Small ways, maybe. The kind of change that didn't announce itself but accumulated over time into something recognizable. She understood that kind of change. She'd been making it herself since the day she walked out of Ashvale with her coat and her books and nothing else. The return to Frostmere took 3 days. The army moved at measured pace, carrying the injured, and Lysara moved through the column each morning doing rounds with the same thoroughness she'd have applied in a proper medical room, checking wounds and changing dressings and arguing with soldiers who insisted they were fine in the specific way of people who were not fine. Valor rode with her on the second afternoon, not beside her, slightly behind, the way he did when he was thinking and didn't need to perform anything. She let him be quiet. She'd learned the difference between his silences, the quality of them, the way some were working silences and some were looking silences, and this one was the second kind. "What do you want?" he said eventually. She looked at him. "Right now, specifically? When this is over, when we're back, what do you want?" She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to think about everything. Without the performance of smaller needs, without the deflection of someone who'd been told their wanting was inconvenient. "A room with books," she said. "Access to anyone in the kingdom who needs healing. Permission to do my work without someone deciding I need to be managed." He was quiet. "And?" he said. She looked at him sidelong. "You know the and," she said. "I want to hear you say it." She thought about the bond, settled in her chest now, complete and quiet as a healed wound. She thought about the man in the gorge and the library and the cave and the fire and all the incremental honest things he'd placed between them like stones laid across a cold stream. "I want the same thing you want," she said, "but I won't be managed. I won't be positioned. I won't be the variable in someone else's calculation." "I know," he said. "If that's what I am to you, this ends here." "It's not," he said. "It was." "It was," he said. "It isn't." He held her gaze. "You changed the calculation by refusing to stay inside it. I don't know how to do what you're describing yet. I'm going to learn it badly and slowly, and there will be moments you want to put your knife through the table." "There have already been those moments." "I know." Something moved in his face. "I'm telling you the truth about what I am, not what I intend to be. What I am, right now, that's changing." She looked at him for a long time. "All right," she said. They rode on. Frostmere received them with the particular quality of a city that had been holding its breath and could finally release it. The gates were open. The people filled the streets in the cold morning light, and the sound that came from them as the column passed wasn't performance. It had the raw, unorganized quality of genuine relief, which was the only kind that meant anything. Valor did not slow his horse for it. He acknowledged it the way he acknowledged most things, with his spine straight and his face forward and the weight of it carried somewhere internal. She rode beside him this time. Seraphine was at the castle gate. She should have been inside, warm, off her feet, resting the ribs that still needed another 2 weeks before they'd knit correctly. She was outside in her best coat with her silver hair pinned up and her fractured wrist in its wrap, and the expression on her face of a woman who had been told to rest and had decided that was a suggestion rather than a rule. She looked at Valor first, checked him with the fast, efficient thoroughness of a mother who had been counting his injuries since he was old enough to acquire them. Then she looked at Lysara. She didn't say anything, just looked with those sharp, pale eyes that missed nothing, and then the corner of her mouth moved in that not-quite smile Lysara had first seen in the cave when she'd told her to sleep. "Go inside," Lysara said. "Your ribs." "My ribs are fine," Seraphine said. "Your ribs are 3 weeks from fine. Go inside before I carry you." Seraphine went inside with the dignity of a woman who was choosing to go inside and not being sent anywhere. The Great Hall of Frostmere was every noble house assembled in the formal register of a court that understood something had shifted and was waiting to understand the new shape of things. The Thornvale-aligned lords were present. They would be, because absence was its own declaration, and none of them were ready for that yet. They stood in their positions with the careful neutrality of people who had backed a losing position and were assessing the cost. Valor walked the length of the hall without hurrying. Lysara walked beside him. She felt the room's attention like weather, the weight of it pressing from multiple directions at once, some hostile, some calculating, some genuinely uncertain. Lady Vasha Thornvale stood at the edge of her family's cluster, with her face controlled and her eyes tracking Lysara's movement with the intensity of someone revising assumptions in real time. Valor stopped at the head of the hall. He looked at the assembled court for a long moment. Let the silence do its work, the way silence worked in rooms like this, not as emptiness, but as pressure. Cassian Aldry operated as an agent of the Thornvale faction against the interests and safety of this kingdom, he said. His voice carried, without being raised, the natural projection of a man who'd been filling rooms with it his whole life. He is dead. His holdings are forfeit. His family will answer to the court's review in 30 days. He looked at the Thornvale section. The Thornvale emergency summons produced a force that stood down before a Frostmere engagement, he said. The records will show this accurately. Any house that believes the terms offered at the fortress were insufficient is welcome to present that argument to my council in writing, with their name attached to it, within 7 days. Nobody moved. Good, he said. He turned and looked at her. She looked back. The hall was very quiet. Lysara Vale was exiled from her birth village for the crime of saving a child's life, he said, and the flatness in his voice had a different quality now, not coldness, but weight, the weight of something he meant with everything he had. She survived 3 weeks alone in the northern waste. She saved the Queen Mother's life in a blizzard with her own hands and her own knowledge and without being asked. She rode into a Thornvale fortress in the dark and held a gate line with a field knife. He paused. She is moonbound, of a lineage older than any title in this hall. The silence was absolute. And she stands here as my equal, he said. Anyone who wishes to dispute that may dispute it to my face now while I'm in a reasonable mood. Nobody disputed it. He held out his hand. She looked at it, looked at his face. The crack was open, and it was never going to close back up, and she understood now that this was not damage. It was the thing that had always been there underneath the architecture, waiting for the construction to stop being necessary. She took his hand. The hall exhaled. That night she stood on the eastern battlements with the wind in her face and the city below her breathing its 10,000-person breath, and she thought about the shape of the life she'd been living up until 3 weeks ago. The exile, the wilderness, the radical stripping away of everything that wasn't essential. She hadn't understood at the time that it was preparation, not punishment, not random cruelty from a world that had decided she was surplus to requirements. Preparation, for the cold that didn't kill her, for the woman in the snow, for the gorge and the library and the fortress hall and the long road back. There was something in the surviving that changed the fundamental nature of what you were, not by adding to it, but by burning away what wasn't real. The woman who'd stood in Ashvale Square and heard 12 voices say leave was not who she was. She was what the stripping away had uncovered. She understood that now. Not with bitterness, not with the particular grateful survivor narrative she'd heard from other people who'd been through their own fires. Just clearly, the way she understood bodies and wounds and what was needed to heal them. She heard him before she felt him, his boots on the stone, the specific weight and rhythm of him. He came and stood beside her. They looked at the city for a while. Seraphine's asleep, she said. I know. Marit told me she walked back in herself and made a point of it. Her ribs are going to be fine, Lysara said. She's stubborn enough to heal on principle. He was quiet. You should know, he said, that I'm going to do it again. She looked at him. Do what? Calculate, he said. Manage. Choose the operational approach over the honest one when the pressure is high enough. It's built into me. I've been doing it since I was 12 years old, and my father showed me that the only currency that doesn't devalue is information. He looked at her directly. I'm going to do it again, and I need you to call it when I do. I will, she said. I know. Something in his face that was not the crack. Something quieter. That's not reassurance. That's the reason. She understood that. She thought about everything she'd asked of people in her life. Not comfort, not approval, not the performance of acceptance. Just the willingness to look at what was actually there and not look away. He was doing that. She turned and looked at him fully. This man who had built walls around every real thing he felt, and then found himself standing on the wrong side of the walls when it mattered, and felt something settle in her that had not been settled since the day she'd walked out of Asheville with the winter in front of her and nothing behind her worth turning back for. She had not been walking toward this. She hadn't known this existed, but she'd been walking toward herself, and this was where she found him. The bond, she said. Yes. It's going to change things in the court, the clans, the way the alliances feel. I know, he said. It doesn't make me yours, she said. It doesn't make me Frostmere's. The bond runs both ways, and what it means is that I feel your pack the way you feel them. Equal footing. Equal footing, he said. Say it like you mean it. Equal footing, he said, and this time the weight of it was different. I mean it. She looked at him for a long moment in the cold silver night, with the city below and the plain beyond and the mountains further still, dark and permanent and indifferent to the small fierce lives working themselves out at their feet. Then she stepped into him, and he put his arms around her, and she felt the bond complete itself the rest of the way, all the way down to its foundation, and it was nothing like a cage. It felt like walking inside after a very long winter. Below them, Frostmere burned its small fires against the dark. The abandoned healer who had been nobody stood above all of it, with the Alpha King's arms around her, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, like she was standing exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because she'd been placed there, because she had walked every step of the way herself, and this was where the steps had led, and she had earned every single inch of the ground beneath her feet. The wind moved across the battlements and went north, the direction she'd come from, the direction of empty tundra and 3 weeks of survival and a shallow cave with pine bough insulation and a fire she'd built from nothing. She didn't watch it go. She was done looking at where she'd come from. She looked at the city instead, and the mountains beyond it, and the wide open country that had no edges she'd reached yet, and she breathed.